but that's not yet available. But on our Suffolk Tree Warden network, there's lots of information all about trees. And I'll also give you some recommendations for some books later on. So not all tree wardens are deeply involved. A tree warden can just be somebody who goes out and plants the trees. Not everybody wants to get involved in the planning and development of projects. So I really believe it's an inclusive role that should represent the diversity of the community, so that anybody can play a part in, no matter how big or small. We do have insurance for registered tree wardens, provided that written assessments are carried out for planting events, and obviously children should always be supervised. The risk assessments are really common sense. It's the things that can happen in a woodland or other area, you know, bites, stings, you might be near a river or a road, those kind of health and safety things. We don't insure for power tools because that's a different kettle of fish. You know, chainsaws and things need licenses and protective clothing, and that's not something that we get involved in. Okay, every year there's quite a few planting offers and projects from mainly the Woodland Trust and the Tree Council. I've got some examples here, but they do vary from year to year as the organisation's plans change, and also every year the availability of trees is different. Some years are better for tree germination than others, so we do get a mixed bag each year. So this is our 4th year in partnership with the Woodland Trust and Suffolk County Council to plant thousands of fully subsidised trees. They're all sourced and grown in the UK as part of the Woodland Trust's Eastern Claylands project. And these tree and hedgerow packs are free to tree wardens, and that's significant because as a Haverhill tree warden, you could get significant quantities of trees and hedgerows packs for your community, and they can be planted on any land so long as you've got the landowner's permission. It's a very popular scheme, so it's a first come first served, but all tree wardens are notified when the applications are ready for perusal. Second one there, the Woodland Trust landowner packs. I don't think that's going to be happening this year. You may be aware that the Woodland Trust had issues with internet security things, and I think it's scuppered some of their plans for this year, but we'll wait and see. That's mainly for farmers. And the last one on there, the More Woods, More Hedgerow scheme, that's for larger plantings that's subsidised up to 75%, sorry. So as tree wardens, we might plant a few hundred trees, but when it gets into the thousands, it's the More Woods and More Hedgerow scheme with the Woodland Trust. There are criteria for that, but I haven't seen this year's, and that it's things like it might be that the scheme has to have connectivity from woodland to woodland or hedgerow to hedgerow, but very popular as well. Young people, yeah, there's a huge drive to involve young people. It's well known that there's a lot of environmental anxiety with young people, quite rightly, because of climate change. So lots of projects to include those. So free trees for schools and communities from the Woodland Trust. For the community groups, that land has to be accessible to the public. Obviously for the schools, any school land is fine, but for community groups, it does have to be publicly accessible. And Creating a force for nature in schools as a tree council initiative. And they are inviting registrations of interest now for free orchards and for school orchard packs. And they also have a branching out fund for communities and young people aged up to 21 to take planned planting projects. So you need a plan for that one. You can't just get them and then think, what am I going to do with them? You need a plan. So that's a sample of projects. They may be a bit different this year. Obviously, the season is from November to March to planting. But I think that it'll, in the next month or two, we'll have more details on those projects. Okay, getting into the trees themselves, we either plant cell-grown trees on the left there or bare root trees. Tree wardens, we usually have cell-grown trees. The bare roots tend to be more for the bigger plantings now, where there's thousands of trees. The cell-grown ones do have a higher success rate. They're much easier to plant, and if planted correctly, they normally do better than the bare root trees. So I'll talk a little bit about planting cell-grown trees. The best tool for this is the planting spear. It's a very narrow spade. I don't expect you to read all this, but it shows there are quite a few stages. You basically plunge the spear in, rotate it 180 degrees. That's not easy in wet clay soil. I've hurt my back many times trying to twist this, so sometimes you have to give it a couple of goes without twisting so far. I do see very often trees, the cell grown trees planted quite badly, often with the cell above the ground. And if it's above the ground, the top of the cell, it will just dry out, especially with a dry spring like we've had today. So it does need to be a few centimeters below the surface, not too deep, because if it's too deep, and the bark above the tree collar is wet, that can rot quite easily and kill a tree. So it's very much not about dig a hole and stick it in. There are right and wrong ways of doing this, and you're given all this information when you purchase tree packs. Tree guards, there's spirals on the left here and the larger ones on the right. The spirals are fine if the land has just got rabbits on and voles. Do make sure the spirals go right down to the ground, because otherwise the voles will get underneath them. The taller ones, I'm sure you know, they're for deer. The bigger the deer, the taller the guard we get. You know, your fallow deer need quite a tall guard. You'll notice on the tall ones on the right hand side that all of the stakes are facing the same way. Again, that's part of the planting technique. You want your stake to be facing the direction of the prevailing wind, so that your guard isn't buffering about too much. Took this photo last weekend in a little spinney near me. You can see where all of the bark has been the cambium has been chewed off all the way around that tree whip. I think it was a hazel, not sure. It was in a pretty poor state. That's what happens if you don't put a tree guard on, or if you take it off too soon. Deer, rabbits and voles, they will eat your trees. So do protect them for 3 to 5 years. Depends on the rate of the tree growth. Some will get a good circumference quicker than others. So if they're a bit slow, keep them on a bit longer. But when you do take the tree guards off, the bark is still quite soft and wet. So it's best not done in the fall, in November time, when the deer are the hungriest. Probably best done in the springtime, when the animals have got plenty of other things to eat and they'll be less interested in the trees. So then that bark can harden up again and become more resistant and less tasty to our mammal friends. Another thing I want to say about tree guards is there's a lot of research now on recyclable tree guards. Recyclable tree guards, biodegradable tree guards. There's ones we're experimenting with made of cardboard. We're trying to get some that are based on wool to experiment with, because tree guards are a huge source of plastic pollution across the countryside and highways where they've planted along the reservations. Tree guards get put on, and very rarely do people take them off. And that's a huge problem because they gradually break down like any plastic, and you get all of these plastic splinters just going into the countryside, adding to our plastic problem. One incentive I've started is with a farmer in Great Fimbra who hasn't removed his tree guards. I've offered, if I get a team to remove the tree guards, will you agree to plant some more trees and fill in some of the gaps in your hedging? And he's very happy with that idea. So it's using it as an opportunity to get more trees planted while getting rid of the plastic waste as we go. It is expensive getting rid of tree guards, and we'll probably need some funding for that because they've got to be transported to the recycling centres and cleaned. So it's quite a complicated business. If we can get tree guard collection at scale, it might at some stage be an opportunity for somebody's business to take that on as a profitable enterprise, but that's early days. Okay, right tree, right place. I'm sure you've heard that phrase a lot. So what does that mean? Ideally, plant trees where they can grow to maturity with little or no tree surgery. So consider the size of the tree canopy, its height, and its root spread that might be twice its canopy. Now that's a big ask in an urban community. Great in a park and on a farm, but in an urban area, you're going to have to be pretty careful which trees you choose. Obviously, considering proximity to buildings, walls, overhead cables. I was at a planting site earlier in the year. Lovely community project, but the house adjoining it weren't happy because they directed the footpath across the site past her window. So their solution was to plant trees in front of this window, and they got this box of trees, oaks and all sorts of things. Said, no, you can't plant those in front of their window. You can imagine what they'd be like in 20, 50, 100 years time. They'd have to come down. So people do put trees in the strangest places, and also a lot of trees self-seed where you don't want them. At a recent one in Stowmarket, free sycamores by a wall. The wool was beginning to crack because the root base was moving in the wind because the trees were so big. And they'd self-seeded by the wall, not planted there, so they had to come out. But it was in a nursing home. And although we said at the planning and development meeting that we've got no objections to the trees coming out, we'd like to approach the home that's owned by Mid Suffolk to see if they'd like to replace the trees with some trees dedicated to the Queen's Green Canopy, which is another incentive that's out there that can encourage people to plant trees. The Queen's Green Canopy, the trying to plant a tree for every person in Suffolk. I don't know how many that is. You might be able to tell me, Colin, but that's a lot of trees. So the more
750,000.
Yeah, yeah. So if we've got an opportunity to, when we can't as tree wardens plant trees for the Queen's Green Canopy because we don't own the land, we just facilitate the planting. Your town council may own some land, or a business may own some land where we can say, you know, would you like to dedicate the trees to the canopy? And that's a good opportunity that does encourage some people to plant. So we're all for that. Obviously, overhead cables as well. Underground infrastructure, sewerage, telephone cables, a lot of electricity goes underground now. And a lot of these little power cuts we get aren't from the overhead cables, they're often from the underground cables. Not necessarily from trees, but the underground is obviously moving all the time with the rocks and such. We don't have access to that information of the underground infrastructure, so we would talk to the landowners to find out if there is anything under the ground. Rather, like if you're banging a nail in your wall, you don't want to go through a plumber's pipe or an electric cable. The same with trees. Soil types, obviously in Suffolk it's mostly clay, and this can create subsidence if it dries out and shrinks, and obviously if we plant trees close to buildings, infrastructure where this may occur, it can draw out more water and exacerbate the problem. And that's been exacerbated, I think, by insurance that are very hot on not paying for claims if you could avoid this subsidence. So that's one to be aware of. Do check if the water is waterlogged or wet, floods many times a year, because most trees won't log their roots being wet for long. We tend to go for willows, alder and poplar trees that can tolerate and usually thrive in wet conditions. Also, don't plant on ecologically rich land like ancient meadows. It happened in Woolpit, close to me. They were given some land by a farmer to plant trees on, but when they got the Green Light Trust to do a survey, they said this has got some rare species in here. This is ancient meadowland, so they stopped planting. And similarly, historical features such as ancient monuments, we mustn't do anything to interfere with their part in the landscape. Highways have very strict criteria for roadside planting. We have got information on our website about that. And obviously any roadside trees are on a different rootstock, so that they stay to this a size that's acceptable and isn't going to cause problems for buses and visibility and that kind of thing. Aftercare, mulching. The top tree there, you can see they've mulched right up over the trunk. That's going to cause that trunk to stay very wet. The bark won't harden, and there's a good chance it'll rot. And once the bark rots, the tree will die. So the bottom is a better example, where the mulch is scooped a bit away from the trunk itself to keep it dry. Needs to be about 4 inches deep. You can see there's about a 1 meter diameter circle around the tree. That's great on a green, but it's not always possible to do that on farmland and other rugged terrain. But we do try to keep the weeds down as best as we can. Short grass is particularly harsh environment for trees. Short grass will take up so much moisture and nutrients, it will really deprive the tree. So do try and in that meter circle, if it is feasible, just with a spade or just pulling it up, get rid of that short grass. Once you've got it up, it's quite easy to maintain a couple of times a year, pull out the few weeds, and the tree will have a much better chance. Different sorts of mulches. There's mulch mats, some of which are biodegradable now. I've used old carpet, lino, roof felt. Now, these aren't the most friendly of materials, but sometimes if you've got a lot of trees, it's going to have to be, you know, stuff from the skips of carpet stores, because it's an expensive game. You know, buying a bag of bark from a nursery is probably the best part of a tenner. So there are practicalities here. Straw and hay are very good, but do rot them down first if you can, because if not, they do draw a lot of the nitrogen out of the soil, apparently. I don't quite know the chemistry of that, but if it's not rotted down, it can remove some of the nutrients. In spiral guards especially, the ants love building their nests in them. And it's a horrible thing to do, but I do spend every year knocking ants' nests out of spiral guards, because again, the soil will just rot the bark of the tree. And the weeds, of course, where they're going to grow right inside that spiral. So getting them out as well. And it's always net, also wear gloves. Again, watering if we can, but I appreciate that's not always possible if you've planted somewhere a long way from any supply. The dry spring like this April, I'm sure we've lost quite a few trees. There was just no rain for the month, and where we couldn't water, there'll probably be a higher mortality than in a gentler, kinder spring. But it certainly made up for it this month. A bit on diseases, ash dieback. The picture on the left shows, if you can see the leaves there, I'll describe it as cotton top. The branches, twigs have died back so much, all you can see is cotton top, and that's sort of getting quite advanced ash dieback there. It's a terrible disease. It's estimated it's going to cost, I think, between 6 and 15 billion pounds, you know, for the removal, just keeping the trees safe and replacing them with new trees. So it's a huge problem. Some trees, especially the ones in hedgerows rather than in woods, seem to be showing a bit of resistance. But I think that we're going to lose, I think they say about 80% of the trees, possibly more. So they're ones that we're really looking to replace. And when we replace, we'll be using a wide range of species. It would be a disaster to plant them, to replace them all, say, with oaks, because we also have the oak processionary moth. And this is a pretty scary disease. The hairs of the caterpillars and the caterpillars' nests are very irritable to humans and animals, cause rashes, respiratory problems for anybody susceptible to respiration difficulties, asthma and such. I believe there was a road in Holland that had to close because it was such a health hazard for the traffic driving through the hairs that were just in the air in that environment. As you can say, do not touch them, go near the caterpillars or the nests. Definitely keep children and pets away from them. Don't remove nests or caterpillars yourself. You need professional arborists, and it is reportable to the Forestry Commission. Forestry Commission or Forest Research on the web, there are several sites and even an app where you can report this disease. In moth traps around Suffolk, we have noticed an increase in them over the years. So if you've got anybody in Haverhill who's great at identifying moths, do get in touch with them, and they could perhaps monitor whether any come your way. Fingers crossed they don't. It is a horrible disease. Okay. TPOs, tree preservation orders, made by local authorities to protect individual trees, groups of trees or woodlands of outstanding amenity value. Now, that's a bit of a subjective term, outstanding amenity value. So it is at the council's discretion. TPOs can prohibit the felling of trees without local authority consent. Make sure woodland felled by permitted forestry operations is replanted, not just left felled. Ensure trees removed in contravention of a TPO or TPO trees that dies are replaced. And then the new trees covered by that originally TPO, it doesn't have to be TPO'd again, even though it may be a small whip sapling, it's still TPO'd. And all TPO trees should be visible from roads and public places because, as it says, they are of amenity value. Tree warden nurseries. This is something we've started in Suffolk this year. So it's seed collection, particularly from local trees, because the provenance of trees is so important. Our local trees, especially the ones that have been in, perhaps ancient woods or certainly very well established woods, they're going to have that genetic variability for our climate, our soil conditions, the mycorrhiza, all those things. They've got far more chance of surviving the stresses of climate change and chaotic weather than trees from other places. And also, obviously, using local trees, we're not bringing in any pests, diseases from other areas. It's a really great group. We've got about 20 nurseries now, and they're all volunteers. They've got some in community centres, schools, on farms, in people's back gardens. There's a WhatsApp group. Now, I'm pretty skeptical about WhatsApp and these things, being of an older generation, but I've been so impressed by the information sharing and learning that goes on in the group. They're all passionate about the trees. There was one this morning about someone's cherry saplings. There's an insect making zigzag bites out of the cherry leaves, so they're trying to identify what that pest is. Another one had some galls on oak cherry something, I forget the name of them now, but they're putting these issues on the WhatsApp group, and we've got some great experts on there who say, oh yes, that's what it is, but don't eat it. So that's been great fun. We've got a Q specialist book to give us an online talk on germination, so that's going to be really interesting and expand our knowledge. And as I say, most of the nurseries are modest, rather like tree wardens. It can be done at, individually or at scale. This is a nursery at Debenham High School. These are Harry beds. A chap in the back is Harry, who's developing these beds. These containers are from a farm. They cut the tops off, get the soil in, and you can see they're on a pallet board, so they can move them with a forklift to put them wherever they want to. Some of the seeds that we've been collecting this year, some oaks from Stowmarket. Sorry, that's not oak, that's hornbeam, isn't it? Hornbeam. Yeah, rowan berries here. They need a special technique to get them to germinate, stratifying them. We're just putting them in a mixture of compost and grit. That can take a couple of years for germination. Here's some oaks from Captain's Wood. They'll be from ancient oaks. So like I was saying about the genetic variation and their ability to tolerate Suffolk's conditions really well. A back garden nursery there. Some tree identification books here. I'll pass these on to Saffron and yourself, Colin. They're actually on our website as well. Always good to have a couple of books. I wouldn't just buy one because the pictures and descriptions in one may vary from the other, so cross-reference through a couple of books. I particularly like the Collins books. I find their illustrations more accurate than most. So I'll finish off with how to become a tree warden. I've got some our website here, our coordinator's number, and my own number down there. If I pass these on to Colin and Saffron, we would love to hear from you if you're interested in being a tree warden. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Richard. That was really interesting. Some fascinating information in amongst that. I'd never heard of a tree planting spear. Are those, you get those from garden centres or those specialist things?
They're specialist. We actually have bought some with funding from Suffolk County Council. I must say, Suffolk County Council, thank them for all the funding for the tree nurseries as well. And other expenditure we have, because we're not a charity, we are volunteers. So with their help, we've purchased tree spears that we can lend out to groups if they've got a planting day on. So.
Cool, good. Paul Sadler has posted a question in the chat. I don't know whether you've got your chat switched on. You can have a look at it.
Hi, Paul. Bear with me a second. I have a friend and a relative, and both have planted areas of woodland which have matured, and the forest flora is now shaded out. The advice is to remove every other tree, but the cost is prohibitive. We are now planting hundreds of new trees in the local East Town Park. So how should we deal with the problem of spacing later and when? That's a really good question. We tend to plant quite dense, 3 meters apart, and depending on the species, we will, because they don't all survive, so we overplant and then grub some out. Depends on the type of wood you want as well. And on the species, some species, will tolerate being close together, and perhaps on the outskirts of the wood, you might have almost like a hedge boundary where it's a bit denser. How old are the trees now? Because I'm guessing that's a problem. They've got to an age now where it's difficult to grub them out.
No, you can't hear me if I speak.
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, you can? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
They're probably 18 years, something like that.
Yeah. So that's...
About the time of the millennium was when they went in both cases.
Okay. What species?
One of the woods was very fertile soil, used to be a chicken farm, and the other one was much less. But in both cases, they're now far too thick. And we're planting a lot of trees around here. It'd be good to know when you should start thinning, is what I'm really saying.
When the trees have survived, say after 3 to 5 years, you know which ones are going to survive pretty much. So then you'd be thinning out as early as that. But the other alternative is, if they're older, like you say, can they be coppiced? What sort are they?
They could be, but the problem becomes the cost, because we're talking 1 or 2 acre woods here.
Gosh, yeah.
As opposed to a piece in the back garden, it's a bigger amount.
Yeah, yeah.
And what they tend to do is leave them and say, well, they're as they are, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that show the importance of long-term planning, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it creeps up on you, doesn't it? That's what happens.
Sorry, it creeps up on. Yes, very, very true. Yeah.
Well, then if you might say in 5 years, take out every other tree, when you can actually grab them out still, it's not particularly difficult work then, is it?
That's right. Yeah.
It must be a right time to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And the same with copperson. You don't want to leave it too late for copperson, and on pollarding, if it's done too old, then it will shorten the tree's life. Whereas it's done, fairly young, it will extend the tree's life. And also on the fertility, the trees that they need very little fertility. So on the chicken farm, is there a difference in the tree growth?
That tree growth is faster than the other normal land, if you like.
Yeah.
But the trees, well, as you will see, if they're 3 meters apart and they're big trees, they're obviously too close.
Yeah, yeah.
The ones we're planting locally here in the park, we're planting at 3 meters.
Yeah, so you need a plan to grab out the ones that aren't doing so well.
Yes.
Say 5 years time.
When would you do that?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but happy to talk about this. I'll get some proper expert advice from the Woodland Trust advisors and pass that back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, be very good. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. It's a lovely question, Paul. Thanks. Another point there is that the trees that grow fastest in the best land aren't the ones that live the longest. The ones that live the longest, the ones that tend to struggle a bit. They've had a bit of adversity. So yeah, some of those might be, because they've grown so fast, they might be quite short-lived.
Yeah, don't look very short-lived at the moment.
No, not in human lifetime terms, I guess.
No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, we'll discuss that further.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, so what we're interested in is what we can do as a community, what opportunities might exist. So you're in Stowmarket, and Stowmarket is not dissimilar to Haverhill in many ways, in that it's got quite a big industrial area, etc., and lots of new residential build going on. What did you guys do in Stowmarket to be able to kind of kickstart tree planting?
One of our first projects was actually street trees, and that was a lovely community-based project with the help of the tree officer to purchase those trees. At that time, that was with the county council, and they match funded what residents would pay to help purchase the trees. Was our first project. We're now working, looking at Mid Suffolk have a trees, hedges and wildflowers offer going. So we've put in applications for various pieces of land to be planted with that. A lot of our work has been on attending planning meetings where new developments are coming on to see what trees and hedges we're inevitably losing on some of the applications, and what we can do to mitigate that.
Okay, thank you for that. Saffron's asking what are the best trees for urban areas, and also just adding to that, when you were doing the street planting project, did you have to plant kind of root barriers first?
We weren't planting trees that would need root barriers. If you did need to plant, for some reason, a tree that was going to mature, let's say a maple, then you would certainly need to put in root barriers, and they're very expensive for the cost of the barriers and for the engineering involved in installing them. So we'd avoid that. We would, get trees that are, you can get trees that are, I know, very what's the word? Just going straight up. I'm trying to think of the word. Cylindrical, and on a small rootstock, and they look great. In my street, half a street is done. The other half of the street, people weren't interested, and there's such a difference between the hard concrete and pavement on one side and the softness of the trees on the other side. It's quite striking. Yeah.
What sort of trees are they?
They're on dwarf rootstocks. They're let me think. There's field maple, there's cherry, and there are hawthorn. But they're a hawthorn tree, and they look great. They have a white blossom on in the spring that's just finishing now. Yeah, but
cool. Angela's asked a question about, are there any tree wardens in Haverhill already? And the answer is no. If not, is it the council who look after trees in the area? So West Suffolk Council looks after a lot of the trees in the area. Otherwise, it'd be down to landowners. So West Suffolk Council also has volunteers working down at East Town Park. And one of the things we would like to see happening is to have a group of people acting as tree wardens in Haverhill, probably a team of 5 or 6 at least, covering different parts of town, but working together as a team, so they're not just kind of on their own. What sort of support is available from Suffolk Tree Wardens for new people and new towns wanting to get involved?
Yeah, the website is a great go-to place for information. Myself and Francis, the coordinator, we're always happy to answer emails, calls on problems that arise. Be great to come and visit you and see what's going on.
Is there training available?
The Tree Council are developing training. They said it'd be ready in April, and it's not ready yet. But the main thing is I've only been a tree warden for about 18 months, and the chair for about 3 months. So I'm still learning a hell of a lot, and it's just being in that circle. We learn a lot from each other.
Do they get together then, the Suffolk Tree Wardens kind of have Zoom calls themselves?
Not the whole Suffolk. We do have the AGMs, and as I said, we've got the lady from Kew doing a talk on germination. That's open to all tree wardens. That's our AGM. But Stowmarket Tree Wardens, there's 5 of us, and we meet every sort of 4 to 6 weeks to discuss different issues. And what comes up is, I'm sure you've got similar organisations, the museum will say, hey, we want some help with our hedge planting, or there's a black poplar, is it suitable for taking cuttings from? Ideas rather like trees, they pop up in the town. It's really sort of once you start it's rather a self-germination process, if you pardon the pun.
Cool. Yeah. I'm not ignoring Jackie's question. We'll get to that one, but Angela's posted a kind of follow-up. on how much time would you need to offer to become a tree warden?
Again, my view is that's as much or little as you're happy with, and also our lives change from month to month, day to day. You know, often I'll say I'm going to do this and this and this. You know, I'm behind on quite a few things this time. I've said I just haven't had the time. So that's life, isn't it? So there's no pressure on anybody to achieve X, Y, and Z. I guess the only pressure comes at tree planting season, November to March. That can be pretty full on. So be careful for what you sign up to. Make sure it's realistic for your abilities.
Yeah, that sounds like good advice.
Yeah, and I'd also say, wherever possible, get your planting in before December, because if we have a dry spring like this year, or well, at least April was dry, those trees that were in before Christmas, their roots, their stems will have swelled up so much more to be resilient to the drought, and the ones, you know, it was after then it was cold right through and dry, so they'll have be more losses from the ones planted after Christmas.
Okay,
but sometimes that's not realistic. Yeah.
And then just on kind of tree planting, a great question from Jackie, which is the best tree to plant in a medium-sized private garden. Now, I know with tree schemes, I've been saying that where I was previously, I had a town where people were having 6 whips of different trees and planting them all in a garden that was about the size of a sort of Victorian terrace. So about sort of 11 foot wide and about sort of 40 foot long. And they were planting 6 trees. And I was thinking, well, I'd like to see what that's going to look like in about 30 years' time. Don't think the neighbours will be too pleased. So what is a good tree to plant in a medium-sized private garden?
Well, we do like to stick to native trees if we can. Much better for the wildlife. So I'd probably go for, you know, the crabapple species. Yeah, lovely fruit on there. The birds will love it. You know, if you leave some down, you know, the hedgehogs, and it's great for the wildlife. You know, sensible size, that kind of thing. Even I love hawthorn, and that can be, and a hawthorn is great because you can cut it to whatever size shape you want, really. So it's not going to be as grand as a tree because it doesn't have it takes a long time to get a trunk, but you don't want a big trunk, but those kind of things can be trained to the size you want them. You can cut them down as low as you like; they'll just jump back up.
Cool. Okay. So in terms of it, just going back to the tree warden side of things, we know that there's at least one person who's already expressed an interest in being a tree warden locally, and we're hoping others will as well. So I'm just wondering how the kick-starting it. I'm still not entirely clear in my mind quite how it will work, and I wonder whether perhaps we could talk to East Town Park and the rangers down there, because I would suspect that if they're doing a lot of tree work that Paul was describing, that that might be an opportunity for people to learn off others who've already planted trees. Because if you've never done anything with trees before, you can still be a tree warden, but you'll just not. You need to know, somebody needs to be able to sort of hold your hand a little bit.
That's a very good point. Yeah, it is talking to people with more experience than yourselves. And I'm lucky I do that every day. That's a really good place to start. Yes, yeah. And I'd really like for people interested to register with us. So as I said, then we're covered for insurance, and we can get you lots of materials. One thing I didn't mention that's come to mind is, and I'm not suggesting that you do this, but what we don't do is try to chain ourselves to trees and say, don't chop down this tree. If you want to do that with your Extinction Rebellion hat on, that's fine. But don't as a tree warden, we don't get involved in disputes. That's a condition of the tree council. We don't get involved in disputes. We gather information and pass it on to the town council, the tree officer, whoever it may be, that deals with that.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds like good advice.
But yeah,
I was going to ask, just going on a bit, if people are interested in planting trees or planting seeds, growing a tree from seed, are there some trees that are easier than others? Because you were showing some in your presentation, and you were saying about the ones that the soil had to be stratified, and other things you had to do to the seeds to get them to actually germinate. And I wonder whether what are the simpler ones?
Probably an oak. Get them when they're still green. Not so good when they're going brown. But they're probably the easiest things to grow, and they're not too fussy about the soils and such. But it's been a learning curve for the tree wardens. I think it's something over 16,000 trees, fruits were collected. But what percentage of those we get obviously won't be 16,000. Some died off in the cold spell we've had. Some have got chlorosis in the leaves. We're not sure why. We think that's because the soils used aren't draining well enough. So there are lots of problems, but it's also very exciting. You're probably going to get a tray of 40 and one or two survive, perhaps. But that they're from local stock, and you've done it yourself. That's fantastic. So that was probably a low percentage, but I'm just saying that it's not like growing cress, obviously.
How long does it take? How long does an oak seed take before it's a big enough sapling to plant out?
Probably the second year. Yeah, as long as it's got a guard around it. Some seeds don't germinate in the first year. We've got booklets and advice on what seeds to plant, like witch elm. Their seeds were last month, probably still now. So different times of year for collecting different seeds, fruits, and so on. It's fascinating, and also cuttings. Willow is very easy from cuttings. Poplar black poplar at least is quite specialist, and we go through a lady called Sue Houghton, who is the recorder for the Suffolk Biodiversity, forgotten the name now, Naturalist Society, I guess, and they've got every black poplar that we know of recorded. Is it male or female? What condition is it in? And a lot of them are actually hybrids, and apparently some of the experts who identify them even go by smell to see if they're actually a black poplar or a hybrid. So it's absolutely fascinating. Who'd have thought you could smell the species of a tree?
Definitely. Does anyone else have any other questions that they would like to ask? Either Richard about trees and the tree warden scheme, or want to talk about what we could possibly get up to in Haverhill. If anyone has any aspirations, any ideas, what we might want to do as far as tree planting is concerned, you can either put it in the chat, or you can come on and you can speak on this one. Oh yeah, Angela, go on.
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can, yes.
Okay. Hello. Well, I'm quite interested in sort of developing a tree corridor in Haverhill or in the surrounding area. It seems like we've got a lot of sort of patches of woodlands and areas like that, but they're not connected. And it's been very difficult during this last year, noticeably so, to sort of get out into the countryside and to connect up with different areas. So I'm wondering whether there is a way that the tree warden scheme could sort of get involved with that. I know it's probably, quite ambitious, but let's aim high. So any thoughts on that, please?
Connectivity always comes down to the landowner, doesn't it? And I'm guessing that you've probably got several landowners on the area you're considering. So the first thing that we'd do is would approach the landowners, for interest, and so there's encouragement we can give from the new elm scheme that's coming up for farmers. The more that the incentives since Brexit, for more biodiversity on land, and most cleaners are very willing to plant trees. You'd be surprised if farmers are very keen. Other landowners might be tempted by the Queen's Green Canopy. So I'd be looking at who the landowners are and how we could approach them tactfully. It could also, if it's a very big project and landowners are willing to come under the Eastern Claylands project for the Woodland Trust, more trees and hedgerows. One of the criteria there can be connectivity. So it fits quite a few potential projects there. So I'd be happy to look at that with you. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Do you know the landowners, or is that something that we'd have to research?
I would have to research, and because we're in the corner of West Suffolk, so there's 3 counties here.
Yes.
I've walked all into the other 2 counties, into Essex and Cambridgeshire from Haverhill. So we're right in that corner. So it's going to involve other people as well, I suppose, other councils and people.
Yeah, and possibly there are tree wardens in those other councils that I don't know.
I don't know. It's possible
that we can link with. Yeah. Shall we make a plan to look at that? Yeah.
Anyone else is interested? And don't want to do it on my own.
No. But as I say, these things tend to germinate, and interest really does grow.
I know there have been projects before with Suffolk Hedgerow Survey, etc., where what they were looking at creating were green corridors, as Andrew's describing, particularly for the wildlife. So where there are kind of good diversity hedgerows that can be connected up with some planting to make it easier for wildlife to sort of make their way across a town and round the outside of a town. So that sounds like a really interesting idea to explore. And it could be a matter of clever filling in of gaps that have been created to create that kind of green corridor.
Yeah. And in the hedgerows, we also like to put standard trees in there every 10 meters or so, because that's much birds, especially bats. They will then go from wood to wood. So I don't know if you've got a bat group in Haverhill or other.
I don't know. I've not heard of anything like that. Don't know anybody else on the call. Paul's nodding, so perhaps Paul, do you know there's a bat group? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Yes, there is a bat group, and I have been on evening walks with them with their little radios, listening to the bats and looking at the bats. Again, in East Town Park, and I know at least one, in fact 2, of the members. If you did want to get in touch, I'm not a member personally.
Okay, and is that a local group?
Yes, Haverhill.
Wow.
Whether they've got an official name, I think they have. I think they're called the Bat Group. Certainly they're a group of people, and there are bat boxes in the trees in the avenue in East Town Park. and other places around town, up on the Wilsey area. I think there's some up there as well.
Cool. And do you know the sort of bats that they've got there?
No, I might have known, but it's gone through my head, shall we say.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah,
interesting.
Pipistrelles to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah, long-eared browns, I'll bet.
Yeah, there are bats in the church towers as well, all the usual things.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Wow, excellent.
So all we need now is Mothman. We've got Batman. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, I think as well, because it does link up with other projects. Yeah.
Has anyone else got any other questions or suggestions for what we could be getting up to? It was a great suggestion from Angela. And thank you, Mandy, for that offer. That's fantastic.
So I just wonder what's the next step then? If you sort of take on a project as such, or is it a case of becoming a tree warden and going from there? What's the next sort of step to take?
We'd love you to become a tree warden. And well, then you'll have access to all of our materials and tools, etc. Probably look at a single piece of land that you think is perhaps low-hanging fruit to make a start. I think complete connectivity in urban areas is very rarely achievable, but the more we do, the better. So, Colin, you were going to speak.
So I've just put my email address in the chat. So if anybody's interested in getting involved, that would probably be a good place to start. So we've definitely got contact with you. Saffron and I, when we were discussing the needs, have also kind of made some initial contacts with other people. We want this to be as much as possible community led, so we were slightly kind of wary to go too mad because we don't want it to be just our ideas, but we do know that Christine Williams, who is at East Town Park, that we want to have a conversation with her because she has a team of rangers already. We also know that there's other people who weren't able to be on this call who are interested in being tree wardens as well. So you wouldn't find yourselves being the only person in it. And what we'd look at is what equipment, what training, if you need to join up groups, then the town council's there to offer the support. And we do have potential funding available to help with this. We also have, if you know Haverhill, there's a project called the Chalkston Open Space Project, and it is the old middle school the playing fields, which is between Tesco's and the care home up on Millfields Way. And that the town council has taken a lease, 125-year lease from the county council for a range of different things. But we have had Suffolk Wildlife Trust out there. And one of the things we're interested in doing is creating hedgerows, planting trees, planting an orchard, and quite a lot of other stuff in there as well, because we don't want it to be a fenced-off forest. We want it to be a living space that people can enjoy. And also, we were talking to the Suffolk Wildlife Trust that the trees that are along the edge of the school, this old school playing field, are not particularly diverse. They're not a particularly great species to be planted there. And whilst we're certainly not going to take a run along with a chainsaw and chop them all down, they have suggested that we take a few out and instead plant something that's more natural for the rolling fieldscape that Haverhill is nested in, so that we can increase the biodiversity. Because it's actually, we talk about bats and Suffolk Wildlife Trust. I remember the lady there saying, Simone saying that no self-respecting bat would take up residence in any of those trees. So it would be good to plant something the bats would like and other wildlife might like to make its home. So we do actually have a piece of land that we can do something on without having to ask other landowners. But we are sure there are other landowners who are out there who might be interested, and particularly there's the Jubilee, the Treebilee that Richard has already mentioned, but also the changes now we've left the EU. One way or another, there's a new guidance coming out from the government, and it seems to be encouraging landowners to really support wildlife and biodiversity. So we think that although there's some very rich farmland in our area, so you can't really plant trees all over prime productive land, but if there's a stewardship scheme that's going to take out the first kind of 30 feet all around a field, and the farmers are going to be supported for turning that land over to tree planting and other forms of biodiversity supporting planting. I think there's a lot of potential opportunities where landowners would be delighted to be able to give over space on field margins. I don't know what Richard's thought is. I'm sure you've read some of the suggestions, and there was a great country file, I think either this weekend or last weekend, talking about how field margins might change.
Yeah, that's the environmental land management scheme, isn't it? The ALMS that you're referring to. And I think, yeah, most farmers, I've been surprised at how keen they are to plant. The tension is, I think at the moment, they're having trouble putting value on these various environmental plantings, because the land use and topography and so on is different for each farm. It's very hard to compare like with like. So that's creating a little bit of anxiety with some landowners. I think that, it's got this environmental value, but is that what the government will give them? So that's still playing out. But despite that, yeah, very few farmers are resistant. Probably some of the older generation are still digging their heels in that land is for profit, but we can't do a lot about that. Two other things in Stowmarket, well, one in Stowmarket and one will be open to all tree wardens. In Stowmarket, we're doing an eye-tree survey. So that's not only looking at the species, the health of the trees in Stowmarket, but also their environmental carbon value. What are they really worth? And we're hoping to roll out. There's 16 of us at this training, but we're hoping to roll that out to other parishes who are interested as well. So that might be something you're interested. So it's a survey of your existing trees. That'll help you to plan future plantings. As we've said before, we don't want lots of the same species in the same place, because you're just going to encourage disease for that species. And old plantings, you need to, all the limes are together, all the maples are together, the sycamores are together, and so on, and that's not good practice. So as they evolve, we would need to be more diverse in those species. The second thing is we're hoping to lay on a hedge laying course in the autumn after bird nesting, etc. Because that's a great way. It is very labour intensive, but it's a great way for farmers to have, a really interesting hedge without having to flail it to death every year. Because I'm sure you've all seen, hedgerows that have been, terribly flailed, hashed to bits. It looks bad and it's not good for wildlife. So we're encouraging hedge laying where people have got the resources, but it's not realistic on a large scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that usually that's to kind of stop proof hedges to save having to put a fence up? Do you get that so much around where it's crops rather than animals?
Really just to avoid the flailing, and it's also obviously got historic and landscape value to it, rather like, dry stone walls, they're a great feature. And obviously they are more dense, so that there'll be a better windbreak.
Excellent. Saffron, you got your hand up.
Just thought I'd mention, sort of in the meantime, we're hoping to set up a Facebook group soon, which would be helpful for communication. Obviously, it would be nice to meet up in person, but it might be good just to sort of get the conversation going online before meeting up. I definitely think you're saying about surveys, Richard, it would definitely be great, especially if you want to create a corridor. I imagine seeing visually where, would be, because you could sort of almost draw a line sort of with a map, and then you can identify sort of the owners. I guess that would be a really good place to start. I don't know if we've got tree maps available.
Do you use any particular mapping systems in the council, Colin?
We don't. We do have we're a member of the public sector mapping agreement with Ordnance Survey, so we can print off maps of use, and our colleagues at the district have always been pretty good at being able to produce maps. I have to say that our GIS systems, they are pretty complicated. You need to really get to grips with those, but they are out there, and I know there will be people who are used to using them.
Yeah, and it goes back to what Paul was saying earlier about planning what's this going to look like in the future. So very important. Yeah, and I'd be happy if you want to have a Zoom meeting about any of these ideas. I'd be very happy to join you. Help to start things off.
Excellent, thank you. So I think what we're going to, and I agree with Mark, it would be great to be able to meet up face to face for this sort of thing. And obviously, this is very much an outdoor activity in any case, so we're already free to do that. What I'm going to do is have a conversation with Christine at West Suffolk to see what we can do with her group in any case. And please do email me if you're interested in getting involved in one of these projects, because I know there is stuff that we can be getting up to, not least on our own land, but certainly if there's a group, then we can actually make contact with landowners around Haverhill and see who would be interested in getting people involved. And I think there's also work to be done with local schools as well. Having some volunteers willing to get involved in that, and also if we can source training so people feel more confident about what they're getting up to, and I expect that probably means at times getting together with other local tree warden groups around Suffolk as well, then that would be cool to be able to do that. Does anyone have any other questions for Richard? Okay, so, well, Richard, that has been amazing. Thank you. So interesting, so much to learn about trees, and we perhaps still take them too much for granted, really, and they're keeping us alive. And it's the opportunity to really enjoy them all the more. Angela, you could have put your hand up. Oh, okay, yeah. Round of applause. Yes, very well deserved. Absolutely.
do please make my details available and the website to anybody who wishes to use them, and happy to receive a phone call or an email to chat further.
Great. We'll update our sustainablehaverhill.uk webpage with more information here. This will turn into a podcast, so if you want to check back on anything that was said, that will be done. There's another session. There's another session next week, Saffron. What's the one?
We've got litter picking on Wednesday, same time, 7 p.m. Yeah.
Brilliant. Good. So another final thanks to Richard, and thank you all very much for coming along, and do drop me an email or check out sustainablehaverhill.uk for more information how you can get in contact, and hopefully we'll be working together in a field somewhere planting some trees very soon. Well, at least in the autumn anyway.
Hopefully you're blazing a trail for other towns and parishes to follow your lead.
Well, we're following Stowmarket's lead by the sound of it. Thank you very much, and thank you all very much for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the bank holiday weekend.
Thank you, Richard, and you too.